Intimidated by big cuts of beef? Don't be. You can save some money, and today I'll show you how. Let's get the most beef for your buck. I'll be working with a Certified Angus Beef strip loin. Probably the easiest to cut, but it is an investment, so it can be intimidating. I'm just gonna go through, slice the bag a little bit. I don't wanna accidentally slice the meat, so I like to cut on the fat side and be careful when opening the bag. And then just pull it out. Try and leave any purge in that bag so you don't make too much of a mess. Now just pat her dry completely. So purge is not blood. That's what a lot of people think. It's just a protein-saturated water, essentially. Takes the color from the myoglobin proteins, and that's it. There's no blood to it. Just a little bit of protein juices. So this is gonna be the kind of the rib end of the strip. So this is where the strip starts, okay? And then this is the sirloin end of the strip. So this is where it ends, and then we continue on to the sirloin. This is my favorite part right through here. But because this is like a cut done, before it's put in the bag, the color's a little off. Sometimes it can be angled. So what I like to do is face it and just make sure that when I'm cutting, you can see there's a slight angle. I'm gonna cut it straight here to make sure you get a nice flat cut on the end of this strip loin. And then we're gonna save this, because hey, look how beautiful that is. Pound it down for like a thin breakfast steak or sandwich steak or something like that. Or what I like to do with stuff like this is turn it into stir fry. Now I'm gonna make sure to utilize everything. So any of this fat, we're gonna save that too. So now, I like cutting my steaks thick. So I cut them about the same thickness as this knife. So right there, and I'll mark it. And then you just wanna do as smooth a motion as possible. Keep your fingers back. Sometimes I'll hold with one after the knife's already through. And then you just wanna keep it flat. That is an untrimmed strip, portioned nicely. You want it to keep as consistent as possible. And that's my favorite thickness. I find that it cooks nice and medium rare that way and stays perfect. So now, I'll go through and I'll cut all the steaks and then we can trim them. Keep fingers back, smooth fluid motions. The marbling in this is just amazing. So that is gonna be a beautiful eating steak. And I already like this. Like I said, this really isn't that hard. It's just about keeping your consistent cut, making not too much of a sawing motion. You wanna just kind of go in, pull back, most maybe 3 strokes tops, that's it. So you go in and then pull back and use the length, the entire length of that knife. That's why I like to use a long knife when cutting steaks, because you get in to kind of break through that top fat, and then you can use the length of your knife to pull through and pull up to cut in the smooth fluid motion. Now, we're starting to get into that sirloin end. So you can see you're starting to get a little bit of silver skin here. These steaks still eat just fine, but since I'm doing this at home, this isn't for a butcher counter, I'm not doing this at a restaurant, this is for my pleasure and what my family likes to eat. I will take this sirloin section and do a couple other things with it because I've got a good amount of steaks now. So first of all, again, I'll trim the fat, and we're gonna save this fat because I'm gonna render that down later. But for this sirloin part, I like to cut it into the individual pieces and make a couple things out of it, because one thing, we're gonna have a little bit of trim, and I like to use all the trim for stir fry because it's nice, tender, whole pieces of meat that I don't have a grinder, so I'm not gonna grind it all, but I like to use it for something. So stir fry is really nice. Like, this is probably one of the only pieces I won't use much of. It's just kind of all silver skin. There's a little bit of meat in there I'll trim out. Silver skin is what you think of when you think of gristle. It's the stuff that doesn't really cook down at low temperatures. At higher temperatures, some of it does. So when you're braising and slow cooking and it gets up to 200 and some degrees and sits there for a while, it'll break down. But when you're cooking a steak, it doesn't really break down, and that's when you get that gristle that can be a little unappealing. So here, actually I'll show right here. Silver skin line here, and then around the back through here. So you kind of have this wedge triangle shape. So what I like to do is just cut this out and just use my knife to follow that silver skin instead of pushing down, trying to cut through it. I just kind of let it ride along that silver skin, kind of like like filleting a fish, taking the skin off a fish. And then you get this nice part here. Then I'll come underneath and trim all this down. Get all that off. And then you can take this silver skin here. I'll just notch it just a little bit, keep my fingers out of the way. Okay, just to get through. Now I'll get under it with this knife. And again, just kind of ride underneath it. Try and cut all that off. So you can see it a little bit better. There's still a little bit left there. Just cut, push through lightly, just try and trim all that off. And like I said, if you don't want to do this, you can cut them into steaks. But now we've got some good cuts. This is great for stir fry. And then this, again, could be stir fry or kabob meat. So I'll set that aside with my thin cut steak for now. Okay. And then we'll get to trimming these steaks. All right, so here we have the strip, New York strip. Some places will refer to it as Kansas City strip. All of it is a cut from the loin. It's all gonna be just about the same. I'm just taking this fat down to 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch. I do wanna leave some of that on there. It's just kind of traditional of a steak like this. And then you have this, what's called the tail. You want a little bit of tail left on, and this is just the traditional way. If you wanted to, you could block that whole thing off. You could pull all that fat off, but I'm just cutting these into traditional steaks. So I'm gonna cut this tail just kind of at a slight angle, just to remove the excess fat. So there's kind of what you would normally see in the grocery stores in New York strip. So again, I'll just go through all of these. So right here, there's a little bit of silver skin. There's a little bit more right here. I don't always remove that. It depends how thick it is, because it kind of keeps the steak together nicely, otherwise it can peel back a little bit. But right here, you'll see they're kind of like dots. I like to cut those out for sure. And keep your fingers kind of curled and back. Keep that thumb out of the way. You don't need a full-size knife like this. You can just use a boning knife. It will work, absolutely, because you can push and drag through. You just don't have as much leverage. I feel like, sometimes you kind of have to saw a little more. Your blade, obviously, doesn't get through the steak as much as with a long knife. So these are the two knives. If you're gonna cut meat at home, you're gonna practice, these are the two to have, as well as the honing steel to keep them sharp. But both of these are what you want. Boning, and then this is more of your breaker, your steak cutter. It's a good utility cutting knife. This is good for smaller work, boning out back ribs, cutting anything bone in, and trimming as well. Like this is great for trimming down these steaks. If you want knives like these, you can check out the brand store and check out the new butcher set. You'll have everything you need to cut up big hunks of meat like this. You can see this is a good amount of fat, but that's why we don't want to waste it. If I had a grinder, you could grind some of this together, make steak burgers, great way to use it. We'll get that all in the pot. I cut it into small pieces because it creates a little more surface area, so it renders more efficiently and quickly. And I'm gonna put about 1/2 cup of water in the bottom, turn this on. Once the water comes to a simmer, I'll drop it down to a lower heat. The water will help to start to render the fat, and that way it won't burn the bits of fat in the pan. Get the fat rendering. I got my initial steak here, the face cut, which you can save for a breakfast steak, but I love cooking stir fry, so I'm gonna turn that into some stir fry meat. And since we have that fat rendering, cut off that and get that into my render. And I'll trim this down a little tighter because again, it's gonna be used for stir fry, not a steak. Get it all in the render, it's fine. And now, a lot of people say, cut against the grain. Well, when you're cutting steaks, you're already cutting against the grain. The grain runs this way. So I've already cut this against the grain. So now, if I were to cut against the grain, I'd have to cut again this way. So what I'll do is, instead of cutting directly up and down, just kind of a slight angle for my stir fry. Because you're not really cutting against the grain at this part. But if you do an angle, you kind of get in the best, your best option here. So this piece from that sirloin, you can see the grain runs this direction because I took it off the top of that steak. So now, to cut against the grain, I want to go this direction. This one you will actually get some against the grain slices. And then here I'll just block this because we're going into, spring eventually someday. And I like to do this into kabob meat. Again, or you could do steaks or stir fry, whatever you want. But I like to get variety out of my purchase. So we've got some tallow rendering, some nice stir fry, kabob pieces, and then all of these beautiful strip steaks. This is a great way to feed your family multiple meals out of one strip loin. You could cook this all this week or freeze it for up to 6 months. Hopefully this video is helpful and you can save a little money when you can be your own butcher. Join us again next time here in the test kitchen.